Well, I'm disappointed that we couldn't have church today, but I wanted to bring this short devotion to you and your family this morning in hopes that it can be an encouragement to you this week and give you something to kind of look forward to next Sunday as we continue our series in giving. I do want to make a couple of announcements. We will reschedule the deacon ordination, which was supposed to take place tonight, but because of the weather, of course, we want everyone to stay home and stay safe. So we will reschedule that, and we'll be giving you those dates. Of course, we want to remind everyone the Baptist Men's Conference is coming to Oak Lawn Thursday, February the 18th, and you need to register for that. It is no cost, but the meal will be at 6 p.m., and that will be prepared by our folks. And then there will be a rally to follow here in the sanctuary, and our music team will be providing the music for that. So if you want to come to that and we want to make a good showing for that night, and we want our church members to be there, make sure that you sign up for that. Grief Share is coming back January 25th. So if you want to be a part of Grief Share, make sure you sign up, see Barbara, or sign up in the foyer for that. And a lot of good things happening. We've been so blessed the last few weeks. God has blessed us with wonderful attendance, and we want to keep that excitement going. Wanted to share a quick devotion with you, just continuing our thoughts on generous giving, generous lifestyle. Last week we discussed, of course, if you remember, we talked about investing in eternal things and investing in things that matter in regards to our wealth, in regards to our stuff, in regards to our finances. And Jesus said for us to not worry about storing up or piling up treasures here on earth, but instead to lay up treasure in heaven. We also talked about the accountability that we all will receive at the judgment seat of Christ. And of course, the passage we gave you in dealing with that is 2 Corinthians 5, where Paul says that when we leave this earth, we are then present with the Lord. And because of that, we should be careful in what we invest in during our time given to us here on this planet, because the Bible does speak clearly that a believer will stand before Jesus at the judgment seat of Christ, and his works will be judged. So we have to be careful that we are investing in the eternal, investing in things that matter. I want to give you a story this morning to think about this week. You probably have heard this story. If you have, just bear with me. Leo Tolstoy once wrote a story about a successful peasant farmer who was not satisfied with his lot. He wanted more of everything. One day he received a novel offer. For 1,000 rubles, he could buy all the land he could walk around in one day. The only catch in the deal is that he had to be back at the starting point by sundown. Early the next morning, he started out walking at a fast pace, excited about how much ground that he was going to be able to cover. And by midday, he was very tired. But he kept going because in his mind, he's like, I've got to cover more ground. I've got to cover more ground. I've got to get more land. I've got to gain more. Well into the afternoon, though, he realized that his greed had taken him far from the starting point. He quickened his pace, and as the sun began to sink low, he began to run, knowing that if he did not make it back by sundown, as the opportunity was given to him, he would lose the chance at being a bigger landholder. So he began to run. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, he came within sight of the finish line, and he was gasping for breath. His heart was pounding. He called upon every ounce of strength left in his body, and he finally staggered across the finish line just before the sun disappeared. He had made it, so he thought. He immediately collapsed, blood streaming from his mouth. In a few minutes, he was dead. Afterwards, his servant dug a grave, and it was not much over 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. The title of Tolstoy's story was, How Much Land Does a Man Need? Sir Fred Catherwood said, greed is the logical result of the belief that there is no life after death. We grab what we can, while we can, however we can, and then hold on to it as hard as we can. And that's the attitude of so many people in this life. That's the attitude of so many believers in this life. And we live as though there is no eternity. We live as though we we have to gain it all and get it all. And we live as though, listen to me, that our possessions are what gives us joy and gives meaning to this life. And interesting, in Matthew 5 and 6, the parallel passage to that, or Luke's account of that, is found in Luke 11 and 12. And Jesus gives us some insight to an illustration that he gives us back in Matthew 6, and he does in Luke 11 as well, about the lamp of the body being the eye. And he says in verse 22 of Matthew 6, if your eye is good, your whole body is full of light. If your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And then he says in verse 24, no one can serve two masters. You can't serve God and money. It seems like Jesus talks about money in the first part of this passage, verses 19 through 21. And then verses 25 on, he talks about money. And there's this illustration about the eye. And it doesn't seem to fit, but man, it fits perfectly. And we're going to break it down more next week. But I want to give you a passage in Luke chapter 12 that sort of explains what Jesus is talking about. I really believe he's talking about greed. And so for the next 5 minutes or so, we'll talk about how money and materialism, or how greed, can control us. So let's look at this passage in Luke chapter 12. Follow along with me. I think you can see this okay. Here's the story. Then one from the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Where Jesus is teaching this great sermon on the Mount, the guy raises his hand like, hey, teacher, tell my brother to divide this inheritance, this money, this wealth with me. But he said to him, Jesus is like, hey man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? But Jesus, as he always does so well, he takes an opportunity then to tell a story or give a parable and address a subject. And that's what he does. And he said to them, take heed. Hey, listen up, he says. Beware of covetousness. He warns them of covetousness. And not to get into too much about what covetous means. You know what the word covet means. Is I look at something that someone else has and I desire to have it. I can't stand it. I want it so bad it causes me to sin. And Jesus is like, beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist of the abundance of the things he possesses. And there it is right there. We have to continually understand that it's not about this life. And our life doesn't consist of the abundance of the things we possess. That's not what brings joy, and that's not what brings happiness and contentment. Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentiful. So he starts telling the story about this guy who's rich, a rich farmer. And he plants crops. And the Bible here says that he brought this incredible harvest back. Let's look now. Let's look at verse 17. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no room to store my crops? You immediately see this guy turn inside. He's like, look at himself. What can I do for me? It's all about me. How can I store this up for myself? How can I make more room for myself? And you see here, he doesn't think about others. He thinks about himself. So he said, I will do this. I'll pull down my barns. I'm going to pull down what I've got now, and I'm going to build bigger, just so to fit all my stuff. Think about how that applies to your life. Think about how many times we kind of get there. We think in our minds, like, I don't know. I could make room for more. I could have more. I want that. So keep that in mind. I'm going to build greater, he says. Instead of helping, I'm going to help myself. Look at verse 19. And I will say, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. And here, look at this right here. Take your ease. Take it easy. I'm set. I mean, I have this crop that is incredible. I have much that's been given to me. And so now I'm just going to take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Man, that is the philosophy of the world, is it not? It's all about me. It's all about how I feel. It's all about what I can do to better myself. And that's where this guy is. But God enters the picture. God says to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? In other words, hey, look, this stuff belongs to God anyway. And God's like, what a fool you are if you think that you're just promised a tomorrow. And we've been talking about that We get so caught up and we get so stuck in this life that we forget about the eternal. We forget about what's ahead, and that Jesus has already challenged us to invest in things that are eternal. So this guy's more concerned about the here and now. He says, you know what? Tonight you're going to die. Whose will those things be then? Verse 21. So is he who lays up treasure for himself. And Jesus is like, this is what's going to be of that kind of person, and is not rich toward God. And Jesus again is giving us a stern warning of one who is greed, one who is dealing with greed. Tim Keller gives a great illustration or great definition of materialism. He says materialism is an inordinate desire or dependence on money and material things. And we know it takes money to make the world go round. But let me just say, again, that we are being challenged from Jesus himself not to be so tied down with money and materialism and greed. And we're going to see next Sunday, by studying this passage a little more, that greed is a sin that affects every one of us. Greed is a sin actually that can blind us. It can blind us to how we look at life, period. Because here's what we tend to do. We tend to look at someone else who possibly has more money than we do, or is more wealthy than we are. We tend to say, it's not me that's dealing with greed. It's got to be that person. So I want to talk about next week about how we all need to look inside and see how greed affects us, because it affects all of us on a different level. So my challenge today is this, all right? Take a look at this passage this week. Read a little deeper into Matthew 6. Study it for yourself. Let's continue to understand that all the wealth and all the things that we have come from God, who blesses us generously. We live in the United States of America, one of the wealthiest nations. Listen, we really have no idea what poverty is. So I want to continue to challenge us as a church. Invest in eternal things. Invest the things that matter. And Jesus says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart is also. And so this week, continue to be reminded of God's goodness and his abundant wealth that he bestows on all of us. And that when he blesses us, it is our responsibility then to in turn figure out what he wants us to do with the blessing that he bestows on us. God bless you so much. Hopefully next Sunday we'll be able to get right back to it. Come Wednesday night, we're having a great time at Wednesday night Bible study and party with the pastor this coming Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Lord willing, all this ice will be cleared out. Stay safe today. I love you all and looking forward to the next time we gather together. God bless you.